This week, for my trip through the National Park Service locations, I'm leaning into the naval battle parts of this period of war and adventure and featuring Isle Royale in Lake Superior. Before I get too far, looking on a map to see exactly where this island is, as a part of the state of Michigan, I am reminded how bonkers the shape of the state is. See, there's the mitten, right? And then there's the UP, or the Upper Peninsula, that is a hat on the state of Wisconsin. The why of that clearly has to do with rivers and old treaties and strange wrangling with the British who had been fighting with the French. And anyway, when you see these borders that are a fossil record of so much political wrangling that no one even remembers, sometimes it can be hard to stay on mission. But the island itself, just off the north and thus Canadian shore of Lake Superior, Isle Royale, or Ile Royale, depending on your associations, is accessible only by boat and now seaplane. As part of the area's Chippewa, Ojibwe ancestral lands, it is still used as a fishing port, and the land provides foraging and tree sugaring resources along with hunting and trapping opportunities. The wildlife of Isle Royale fortunately resembles what was there when early America was venturing around this island in the 18th and 19th centuries. Its remoteness has certainly helped. Home to moose, wolves, foxes, lynx, and all manner of weasels, including otters, ermine, martens, and mink, along with their food, so rodents like beavers, voles, deer mice, squirrels, and a variety that is this week's focus, the snowshoe hare, which is one of those fascinating animals that changes coats with the seasons, white with the snows and mottled brown in the summer. Isle Royale is a bubble of preserved northern pine forests that covered an entire band of the lower elevations of the northern reaches of this country. The higher elevations are that grassland that America is creeping towards. Its isolated nature means that many species of plant and animal that have been trampled by invasives on the mainland are able to continue to live on Isle Royale. And if for no other reason, it's a great place to go see those dinosaurs in fur coats, that is, moose. And these animals are fast, agile, and huge. Truly a holdover from the age of giant mammals. And I'll add my endorsement. Do not pet the moose. They will squish you in half and not notice it. The island itself, as a hiking and camping destination, also looks to be a bonanza for people looking to view birds, mammals, and plants that are hard to see elsewhere. Also, the succession of shore, edgelands, and progressing forests can also be seen on this microcosm that is Isle Royale. It has different sights to offer summer and winter. Just be sure to dress correctly and mind the weather forecasts. Lake Superior does not care about us puny humans. So, if you're looking for a unique place to visit in the northern reaches of America that is at least within shouting distance of its old early American self, Isle Royale in the national parks is a place to go. Episode 104. So are rabbits American food? Hello, and welcome to the History of American Food. This week, I'll be looking at the shifting relationship with rabbits being food for Americans and get us ready to compare them with the American taste for birds. There will also be a little digression to talk about the differences, if there are any, between rabbits, hares, and jackrabbits. If you want to take this all in, pull up to your place at the table and let's dig in. The first thing you need to know is that Americans have always eaten rabbits and continue to eat rabbits, but we don't really talk about it. And we write it down even less. When embarking on a topic I haven't yet tackled, at least in depth, I tend to look at overview sources to help orient myself. Imagine my shock when the Oxford Encyclopedia of American Food and Drink didn't even have an entry for rabbit, and Amelia Simmons' American Cookery has 0 rabbit recipes. But both of these starting points contain many, many entries for chickens, ducks, turkeys, and an assortment of wild fowl, just birds generally. So what's going on here? Rabbits appear all over the written accounts of all sorts of historical American eaters, but there are no fast food chains built around, say, fricassee rabbit or rabbit pie, the way we have fried chicken and barbecue beef and pork empires. And of course, sandwich joints dedicated to the American big three meats are legion, as are the dinner meals and snack cart and food truck offerings. Rabbits, while ubiquitous on the ground, are a rare sight on the American plate. If I look at the British sources that were guiding American food in its early years, rabbit is ubiquitous. There are recipes for pies, stews, roasted rabbits, fricasseed rabbits. They are jugged, they are potted, they are sauced. And it's not even that they're tucked in under bird recipes where an add-on of will also do for rabbits is used. They have their own recipes, preparation techniques, sauces, and cooking hints. But in most early Americana, while eaten rabbits is spoken of, the recipes for how to get them to that state are limited. What gives? In many ways, this is a case of not writing down what everyone already knows, and the big thing here was that everyone did know that lots of those bird recipes, especially the ones for scrawny chickens and turkeys and hardworking pigeons, were simply known to work for the generally fatless rabbits as well. Also, the recipes from places like England and Germany, that is, Old Prussia and the like, were fine. There was no need to invent anything else. But there were other forces at work. One of them was not the fuzzy bunny issue, by the way. People were still coveting a nice pair of squirrel or rabbit mittens. After witnessing the callous disposal of all those pet deer when they got too big to be cute in the 18th century, I am confident that sentimentality about rabbits was not in play at this point. That really is a 20th century issue with rabbits. So what was at work? First of all, in Britain and much of the rest of Northern Europe that was sending colonists to early America, rabbits were seen as a bit of a luxury. Semi-feral rabbits existed as game on estates, hence all the references to poached rabbits or conies in English, Scottish, and Irish literature. They also existed as raised meat. Rabbit runs were constructed and watched over much in the same way as chicken runs or chicken yards. While rabbits had to be fed and housed and defended from owls, hawks, and foxes the same way chickens were, they were worth it because they took up a small space. They're fairly clean. Their poop is just basically grass, and they're easy to keep as a backyard meat source. And they could be sold at market in much the same way birds were. All this meant rabbits were meat from the estate, so they were rich people food, or they were poached, that is illegally hunted meat, so they were a coveted and they were enjoyed covertly, or they were a purchased meat, so just as respectable as cow or pig or pigeon, or, depending on your region, horse. Oh yeah, and no farmer setting traps to defend their garden vegetables, carrots, peas, cresses, kales, and tender lettuces. None of them was ever going to turn down a rabbit and dumpling stew. But in America, things were a little different. Okay, they were a lot different. Because first of all, no one had time to raise cows in fenced fields. Remember the quasi to mostly feral cows of the 17th century? Or to keep pigs, the scary ones, roaming the cities and forests that had to be brought home in the winter with corn cobs. And a bunch of them went wild and even now haunt America as wild, hairy hogs. Definitely nobody had time or energy to raise domestic rabbits. And after all, why would you? There were plenty of wild rabbits, and you could just go out and shoot or trap them as you pleased. No poaching needed. So rabbits were no longer purchased meat. As they were back in the old country, they had become entirely wild game. And they were eaten alongside the deer, the stinky weasels, the dangerous porcupines, the opinion-dividing beavers, and the easy-to-get possums. Yep, rabbits had fallen firmly into the varmint category. Not fashionable at all. Well, mostly. Usually. Which brings us to our diversion. what are the rabbit differences? Because when talking about these bounders, there are 3 general categories that come up in American English: the rabbit, the hare, and the jackrabbit. To go way back, all rabbit-like animals, including my favorite rock-living puffball, the pika, all have the same foremammal as the rest of the rodents. But some tooth differences somewhere along the way make rabbits et al. Technically not rodents. So it turns out that all rabbits and hares live under the family designation of Leporidae. Rabbits, which covers a long list of genera and an absolute mess of species, manage to spread everywhere west of the Caucasus Mountains in the Eurasian landmass all on their own, as well as down into North Africa, all the way, more or less, to everywhere above the equator. And they're native to large portions of Southeast Asia, including several of the thousands of islands. But over half the world's rabbit population lives in North America. European interlopers aside, there is enormous genetic diversity in the North American rabbits, with a huge range in size and fluffiness all over the continent. Rabbits typically live in herds and tend to dig extensive connected dens called warrens. Their babies are born altricial, that is, hairless with closed eyes, and are basically helpless. And a mother rabbit can give birth to as many as 60 kits in a single year. So the phrase breeding like rabbits is definitely an apt way to describe a population explosion. It also explains why there can be plagues of rabbits, as there has been and sometimes continues to be in Australia and other places that were not originally rabbit habitat. Because predators not used to these rabbits, they know there are easier prey than these bitey, yelly, kicky, scratchy animals. Since world trade got up and running in the 16th century, rabbits have appeared just about everywhere that it's not too cold, not too hot, and not too dry. So it turns out that jackrabbit is simply a name given to varieties of American rabbits and one hare with outsized looking ears. And since these animals live in areas that often lack shade and can get quite toasty, the ears, which are full of blood vessels, can be used to pick up heat from the morning sun on frosty days or work as radiators on hot afternoons. So the name jackrabbit is simply a compression of jackass rabbit, ass being an alternate name for donkey, and the male and females were generally known as Jacks and Jennies, which also explains where the whole mild insult came from as well. For what it's worth, ass became the vulgarity it currently is in the middle of the 20th century. I mean, the animals were always tough, stubborn, and annoying, so being called an ass or a donkey was never complimentary. But the association of the word with the rear end, well, it's not even quite 100 years old. But those jackrabbits, they're just rabbits with really big ears. But back to our Leporidae. All hares are of the genus Lepus, though they have plenty of species under that umbrella. Well, hares are definitely cousins to rabbits. Hares tend to live a more solitary life, though they do get together for a breeding season in the spring and can be seen boxing each other. And instead of extensive warrens, they tend to make simple nests in the crevices of trees, in thickets, or in abandoned shallow dens. Consistent with this less secure housing, leverets, or baby hares, are born precocial. That is, with their eyes open and fully furred and pretty much ready to get up and run away. Because hares have a breeding season where they meet up and breed, rather than living together higgledy-piggledy all year, hares do not breed anywhere near as quickly as rabbits. So hares are generally larger, longer, leaner, and faster, and tend to live at the extreme edges of rabbit ranges, where it is higher, colder, or hotter than where their rabbit counterparts hang out. In America, the snowshoe hare, the one that changes from white for the winter and then brown in the summer, or the antelope jackrabbit, which lives at the edges of the deserts of the American Southwest, are exemplars of this tendency. So while the mellower group-living rabbits have worked as a domesticated meat animal, hares never really have, and therefore are, and almost always were, wild game. Anyway, more rabbits live in North America than anywhere else in the world, so the need and desire to domesticate them and raise them as farm food was just not there for most early Americans. Keeping poultry, while fraught with danger due to foxes, wolves, eagles, and weasels, was still pretty easy. The chickens, turkeys, and ducks and geese were happy to hang around where they were fed, and except for the odd aggressive goose, they were pretty easy to chase down and get into the coop or the pen or the house at night. Rabbits, on the other hand, they need a lot more care. Even here at the end of the 18th century, when people have the energy and labor force to build cow pastures and pig pens and sheepfolds, rabbit runs are a whole other thing. With the poultry and four-footed livestock, you can let all of those out for the day and they'll generally come back in the evening with minimal prodding. Rabbits, on the other hand, are skittish and runners. 50 kilometers an hour or 30 miles per hour. That's fast. As a rake amateur, even I can coax a sheep back in or sneak up on and capture a chicken. Not so much a semi-wild rabbit. Rabbits need to be kept in cages or runs at all times if they are to be a farm product. So if rabbits are already out there wild everywhere, why bother? Which brings us to the next difference. While eating game was becoming a treat in Europe, a symbol of status, it was extremely everyday in America. Except when done as sport amongst the upper crust, it was seen as a sign of poverty or savagery, or that one's farm wasn't being that well run. The message kept being repeated. Why eat outside the fences when good meat is being raised within them? And rabbits had officially fallen into the varmint category in America. So sure, they were being eaten, but the people who were eating them were the people on the frontiers, people on small farms, people who were enslaved and feeding themselves and their families through their own extra efforts. These were not the sort of people who were reading, and even more, were not the sort of people writing cookbooks. And thus, there is a change. While the English cookery books brought over, used, and copied from by the early American cooks had several rabbit and hare recipes, including jugged and potted hares, the American cookbooks that came after them would only have, say, 1 or 2 rabbit recipes. Because there's larger meat to eat. All those deer and then the pigs, so many pigs, and the cows. And the techniques of jugging and potting, for example, fell out of favor as America looked to move west. Smoking and jerking and soon canning meat will become popular, and those old-fashioned practices will be left behind. And the smoking and the jerky and the canning will adapt best to the large pieces of cow and pig and bison that take over the American menu. In other words, all of these changes and trends in American food preservation mean that the jugged hare is left behind. As for taste, well, shooting birds required skill and was a diverting pastime. And of course, the feathers could go into hats, say egret or heron or teal or woodcock or even partridge feathers are all striking in their own ways and allow a wearer to show off their prowess to their friends and talk about their exploits. And while rabbit fur mittens were welcome, they're just kind of utilitarian. So unlike the hunt of the deer and the birds, a successful hunt of rabbit became an also or an only, as in, well, we also got 2 rabbits, or worse, we only got a rabbit. So the rabbit's role in war and adventure. It will definitely not appear as a distributed ration food. Each little rabbit with all their little rabbit bones were not suited for food delivered in bulk, not like the pork or beef or salt fish. But many a rabbit will be shot on the march or trapped around camp and appear in stew pots of both the common soldier and on the fancy tables of the officer's mess. And when it came to adventure, for example, Lewis and Clark, when feeding a large expedition, larger game animals were preferred for shooting, with the limited ammunition on the trail and all that. Though Captain Meriwether Lewis did have a Newfoundland dog that did hunt down and provide a reasonable number of rabbits and squirrels for the common pot. But the traps they brought along were used more often to catch slower moving things like beavers and muskrats. When we think about the voyageurs and the fur trappers and the long hunters of the day, they were after different game. The money simply wasn't there for rabbit skins the way it was for beaver pelts and deer hide. So in adventure, rabbits continued to be an also and an only as well. Generally, no one was going to throw them out, but they weren't going to write home about it. They were not really considered as central to whatever project. And so, as we dig into American cookery, the rabbits are there. People are eating rabbits. And in some places and cases, we'll eat a lot of rabbit and a few hares, to be fair. But for a combination of all these reasons, along with fashion, ease, and habit, rabbit will slide off the American menu and become largely invisible to the American mainstream. And as menus and recollections of this time of American history start to accumulate, the contents of menus and retrospectives will leave out rabbits even more. Because getting a bunch of rabbits for a commemorative dinner or including rabbit recipes in a retrospective cookbook tends not to happen. Because you can't just go buy them at the store. There are no rabbit farms later because there were no rabbit farms earlier. One simply hunted rabbits, and that was that. Oh, and to make matters worse, as more immigrants start to enter America in our next centuries, many of them will show up with a taste for rabbit. And so rabbit gets further shoved away as a strange foreign food. And finally, the rabbit-shaped space in the American diet is thoroughly and completely taken over by the abundant bird life of the continent. As a result, like pumpkin, rabbit will become one of those foods that's around and has a role in American iconography, but falls almost entirely off the American table, especially when looking back straight up the middle and ignoring what's going on at the edges. Next week, we will talk more about the most popular bird foods of this period and how one of them is all gone. It wouldn't be all gone in this turbulent period we're covering, but the seeds of doom for the passenger pigeon were definitely being sown as America started testing out the idea of really spreading out over the continent. And there'll be some discussion of why the passenger pigeon is all gone, but we still have plenty of city pigeons. And hey, why don't we eat those anymore? Thanks for listening. Any email questions or quibbles will continue to reach me at thehistoryofamericanfood@gmail.com. Downloading the episodes helps me know you are out there, but even better than that are your reviews. Let more people know you're listening and enjoying the show, or that you at least find it interesting. Do you want more food and history in your future? You can catch me and a whole gaggle of history podcasters at the Intelligent Speech Online Conference this Saturday. Just a few more days to get your tickets. You can see me live a few times and ask me questions, and you can use my discount code FOOD. Did you miss the conference? Soon my sessions and a whole bunch more will be up for your viewing. I will post the links. And the conference will be back next year with new topics and some familiar faces, and as always, some new people. And you can catch more of me being both silly and profane as I take a deep dive into the 19th century with a co-host this time, Jamie Lewis of Plague of Strength, and our much looser and rather wilder podcast, Prize Fighters, Circus Freaks, and Gangsters. Still food, but now with fashion, fighting, and fraud. Okay, just crime. Lots of crime. Music for this podcast is Fingerlympics by Dr. Turtle, and you can find me on Threads and Insta as @THOA Food, but I'm all X'd out. All of this info is available in the show description.